I'm going to talk about two main aspects of the TTIP that we should be careful for and watch out for and beware of the rhetoric around them without looking deeper into the content. And that's ISDS, or the investment rules, and the labor rules. So starting with ISDS, and there's a couple of handouts over on the table that you can pick up if you want to. One is just a basic one-pager on ISDS, and the other has some charts that I'll talk about. But essentially what it is, it's a private justice system. And from the perspective of a domestic company, it discriminates against them because the only folks who have access to it are foreign-owned businesses. And that's just the structure of it. So the first thing that you have to know is if somebody says you should be in favor of ISDS, what you're saying is better access to justice for foreign businesses than domestic businesses. Why would you want to make that choice? Well, the only times that in the US legal system that you would make a choice to provide differential treatment is if you can show that there's a history of discrimination against the party that you want to provide better treatment to. Where have GE and GM and Coca-Cola and all of these companies shown a history of discriminatory treatment? It's pretty hard to do if you're one of the biggest 500 companies in the world, and it's actually not the case. Most foreign countries are dying for these foreign investors to come in, and when they want to come in, what they do is they give great concessions. So they say, you get a tax holiday for the first 5, 10, or 20 years. We'll buy the roads to your new factory. We'll train the workers for you so you don't have to spend that cost. On and on and on. So what these folks are already getting is discriminatory treatment in their favor. Do they need a private justice system? Third, investor-state dispute settlement. It's historically a neo-colonial tool. It was developed after World War II as the US and Europe were letting go of former colonies, and companies that owned property and businesses there said, we're afraid that these new countries are actually going to follow the Soviet Union rather than the United States. They're going to expropriate our property, and then we'll be left holding the bag. So that's the history of it. And that if you were not a supporter of colonialism, there's a lot of debates you can have about why should we support a neo-colonial tool at all. But certainly, what's the point of it as to an agreement between the United States and the EU, where you already have more than $4 trillion in investments, you already have good, reliable justice systems in all the countries? What's the point? And there is no point. If it's to promote investment, the investment's already there. So it's really an added bonus for the foreign investors. And if you go back to the preliminary question about it's an unjust system, it provides discriminatory justice, how do you fix that? Sort of like trying to put a Band-Aid on a decapitation. You can't really fix something that's inherently unjust. And to give you some examples, now you'll hear that the US has fixed ISDS. They put in a few sentences in the chapter in the TPP and it's all fixed. So let's review what's fixed. There's a new provision that says, of course countries have the right to regulate and they can put in environmental and health and safety protections that are otherwise consistent with this chapter. Okay, so legally that's a nullity. If it's otherwise consistent with the chapter, you don't need a special provision protecting it. So that provides nothing. They put in a new sentence that says it's incumbent upon the claimant to prove all elements of its claim. Okay, well, you learn in the first day of law school in your first torts class that it's always incumbent upon the claimant to prove all elements of its claim. So does that add anything? No. There's a new sentence that says, lost expected profits without more doesn't establish a violation. That goes back to, again, the claimant has to prove all elements of its claim. So when you hear that this unjust process has been fixed, and then you look in depth into what supposedly has been fixed, it's not been fixed. These are little sentences that backers like to point to say, don't worry, we've got this covered. And just to give you a sense of things that have actually been challenged under this system and how your boss would have to explain to folks if this were happening in your district. Things that have been challenged include local minimum wages, local building permits, moratoriums on cyanide mining, moratoriums on fracking, moratoriums on the use of nuclear energy, the banning of toxic additives, tobacco packaging, bridge building, the renegotiation of sovereign debts, quotas issued to comply with the softwood lumber agreement with Canada, and on and on and on. Some of these cases are ongoing. Some of these cases the claimants won. Some of these cases the claimants lost. But why even bother our governments with the burden of having to defend a case about why you would want to label tobacco or why you would or would not want to build a bridge? And finally, these are the things that in a US government publication said are great about the US and why foreign investors want to invest here. And think about all these things and how they would be given away the more that we do ISDS. So an open investment regime. Well, we lose that advantage if you have ISDS. A large economy with big and diverse consumer markets. We lose that advantage. Predictable, stable regulatory regime, including appropriate intellectual property protections. As Dean just explained, we lose that if we do the TTIP. Adequately capacitated infrastructure. I'm not really even sure what they mean by that because our infrastructure is not adequate, whether or not it's capacitated. And new sources of energy. And we've already shown that what we do with trade agreements is expand our exports of energy, which makes energy here more expensive. So that's that. Second, labor and social protections. The US model, it's really based on bottom of the barrel trading partners. What can we get places like Mexico and Colombia and Vietnam to agree to since their labor patterns are so awful? It's not really based on how do we develop this model of a race to the top. And the real danger here with the TTIP in Europe is that we're incenting more investment from Europe in targeted places, right-to-work states that have lower wages, lower labor protections, and specifically places like South Carolina, where Governor Haley has said, we want foreign investment, but we actually don't want it if you bring unions in. So there might be some jobs created in the US if foreign businesses are looking to move out of more high-cost locations in Europe and into the US, but are they jobs that are going to bring us decent pay, benefits, and workplace democracy? Probably not if we look at the history, because where they locate is in the South, in right-to-work states, and many of the jobs they create aren't even jobs with the new employer. They're temp jobs. And that's absolutely true if you look at, say, the Japanese automakers throughout the South. So it's not really possible to be a race to the top here unless we come in with new ideas and new structures and new forms that haven't been included in prior trade agreements. And the problem with trying to finish the TTIP this year is that we're not going to have that opportunity to play that out. What they're going to do is they're going to copy and paste from prior agreements that didn't work and then say, here's what you got. So there's a lot of opportunity to say, let's get rid of ISDS, let's rework the labor chapter, let's do some of these other things, let's stop trying to give more monopolies to drug companies, but we can't do that if we have to finish in 2016. So that's it.